and welcome to my presentation regarding the ecological effects on native versus invasive species, sent to you by Cameron Rockwell. Now, first, whenever we're thinking of environmental hazards damaging the ecosystem, our first instinct is the trees we're chopping down, or say the noxious carbon we're pumping into the air every day. But one that's not nearly as talked about as much comparison, but still very much an issue, is the topic of invasive species, which can have a detriment to both natural animals and as well as humans in our urban environment. Now, first up, what classifies as an invasive species? But simply, an invasive species is an organism that isn't native to its current environment, usually starting off as an exotic species that's brought over by say, someone bringing their pet over from Michigan to California. Yeah, or a snake sneaking on board a cargo plane. Which implies that, as usual, most of it is as the result of human interference. Now, normally exotic species are pretty tame in their own right, and tend to be culled off pretty quickly. Either not being able to find enough food, or being out-competited for resources. But if they can survive long enough to become an invasive species, and there aren't enough limiting factors, which are anything that could keep them in check, like predators or limited resources, that's when an invasive species can become a problem. Now, how can they harm the environment? It's important to know that ecosystems take a very long time to form the delicate balance that they have with their animals and plants. Think of it as a house of cards, for example. Well, it can take a very long time to build a house of cards, and there's not always going to be a guarantee it's going to stick. But the minute you throw a new species into this metaphorical house of cards, everything tends to come crashing down. The biggest problem typically comes when new animal species either outcompete local species for resources, or kill native species, leading to endangerment and in some extreme cases even extinction. But another unforeseen consequence is, for example, when venomous reptiles find their way into environments that are not currently used to having to deal with venoms of its variety. For example, a pharmaceutical company in a region might have the means to treat one venom, while another continent doesn't. So whenever, say, a venomous snake finds its way into one of those continents that doesn't know how to treat its venom, it can cause problems. The bigger issue is typically as a result of diseases, however, which are very easily transmitted by certain bug species, which, as anyone who's seen a mosquito could proudly tell you. Now, what can we do to handle this? Once it gets to a point, invasive species can get to extreme numbers, to the point where it's basically impossible to be able to manage their numbers. But we can do a lot to keep those numbers in check to make sure it doesn't get there. For example, the simple solution is try not to bring your pets with you to any environment where you know they could be risky. For example, most airports carefully monitor that in case any of the plants or animals you're intending to bring along with you could pose a risk to your new environment. And most cargo transportation of any kind automobiles, planes, ships, all of which need to be very careful as to not make sure they have any unexpected passengers. Which is what happened with a few species of snakes a long time ago, and I believe sometime around the 1600s. So, in conclusion, most invasive species start out as exotic species that are willingly or unwillingly introduced to a new environment. And if this new environment does not possess the limiting factors necessary to keep this new species in check, can lead to a series of ecological impacts, such as the destruction of the fragile ecosystem, reduced food supplies for humans and animals, endangering or even extinction of certain native species, and the transmission of new poisons, venoms, and diseases into an environment may not have had any prior need to develop treatments for. Luckily, although it is difficult to manage invasive species once they grow in size, we can play our part in preventing further damage simply by being mindful of the pets that we bring with us on our trips and be careful to make sure we don't have any stowaways before we plan any road trips. And since it was anyway, here is the list in order of the links that I used to access those following photos that you saw. I do not take any credit for the photos. I do not earn a single dollar for them, and each one belongs to its respective owner, none of which are mine. So, anyways, I hope I could teach you a little bit more about invasive species, the effects they have on the environment, and a little bit about what we can do to stop them. So, anyway, this is my first time, but I do hope you took away something from this video. Goodbye.